She walked into that room knowing it could be her death sentence. But what Cleopatra whispered to Julius Caesar that night didn't just seduce the most powerful man in Rome, it nearly brought down an empire that had stood for 5 centuries. And the truth about what really happened? History buried it for over 2,000 years. I'm about to tell you the real story of Cleopatra, not the Hollywood seductress you think you know, but the brilliant, multilingual, politically ruthless mastermind who came closer than anyone in history to conquering Rome from the inside. By the end of this story, you'll understand why the Romans feared her more than any barbarian army, and why they spent centuries rewriting history to make sure no one would ever know the truth about the woman who almost ended their empire. But first, let me ask you something. What if I told you that almost everything you think you know about Cleopatra is wrong? She wasn't even Egyptian, not by blood. Cleopatra VII was born into the Ptolemaic dynasty, a Greek family that had ruled Egypt for nearly 300 years, descended directly from one of Alexander the Great's generals. But here's what made her different from every single ruler who came before her. She was the first member of her entire dynasty in 300 years to actually bother learning the Egyptian language. While her ancestors treated Egypt as a personal ATM, Cleopatra understood something they never did. To truly rule a people, you must become them. By age 18, she spoke 9 languages fluently. 9! She could debate Aristotelian philosophy with the greatest Greek scholars in the world, negotiate trade treaties with Roman senators in perfect Latin, perform sacred ceremonies in ancient Egyptian, and read Persian diplomatic correspondence without a translator. She wasn't just a queen, she was a living bridge between civilizations. She was also, by some estimates, the wealthiest individual on the face of the earth. Egypt's grain fed Rome, all of Rome, its million citizens, its armies, its empire. Egypt's papyrus was the paper that ran the ancient world's bureaucracy. Egypt's gold and luxury goods were unmatched, and Cleopatra controlled all of it. Every grain ship, every gold mine, every trade route. In Rome, the senators knew this. They watched Egypt's wealth and felt something they rarely felt: fear. But in 48 BC, everything that made Cleopatra powerful suddenly put her life at risk. Rome was tearing itself apart in civil war. Julius Caesar was pursuing his rival Pompey across the Mediterranean, and in Alexandria, Cleopatra's own brother, her co-ruler, had just had her exiled from the city under penalty of death. She was 21 years old, brilliant, powerful, and utterly alone. And that's when she made the most audacious decision in ancient history. Julius Caesar arrived in Alexandria on October 2nd, 48 BC, chasing his rival Pompey across the Mediterranean. But Pompey was already dead, murdered on the beach by the Egyptian court before Caesar even landed. Caesar was trapped, 4,000 Roman soldiers in a city of 400,000 people who saw Rome as the enemy. No reliable supply line, no reinforcements coming. The harbor controlled by forces loyal to Cleopatra's brother, who sat on the throne she believed was rightfully hers. Cleopatra was in exile in the desert, camped outside the city walls with a small army she couldn't use without triggering a war that would destroy everything. She needed Caesar, but approaching him was death. Her brother's forces controlled every entrance to the palace. Every entrance, except one. So she did something that no military commander, no diplomat, no king or emperor had ever done before or ever has since. Something so audacious that historians have debated for 2,000 years whether to call it brilliance or insanity. She had herself smuggled into Caesar's private chambers, wrapped in a carpet. Now, here's what history doesn't tell you about that moment. It wasn't seduction that won Caesar over. That's the version Rome wrote later to make themselves feel better about what happened next. What Cleopatra offered Caesar that night wasn't her body. It was something far more valuable. She offered him the key to feeding an empire,
Egypt's grain was Rome's lifeline. Without Egyptian wheat, Rome starved. Without Egyptian gold, Rome's armies couldn't be paid. Without Alexandria's trade routes, Rome's economy collapsed. And every single one of those things, every grain ship, every gold mine, every trade route, ran through Cleopatra's treasury. She didn't offer Caesar her body, she offered him the survival of his empire. And Caesar, the greatest military mind of his age, a man who had never in his life been outmaneuvered, sat across from a 21-year-old woman and realized, perhaps for the first time, that he was dealing with someone who thought 3 moves ahead of everyone else in the room. That night, they didn't just become lovers, they became partners in the most dangerous political alliance in ancient history.
What followed the carpet meeting was, by any historical measure, extraordinary. Caesar and Cleopatra sailed the length of the Nile together on a royal barge, 200 ships in their flotilla, while Egyptian crowds lined the banks to watch their living goddess and the most powerful man in Rome travel together as partners. She gave him a son, Caesarion, Little Caesar, the only biological child Julius Caesar ever acknowledged. And he gave her what she needed, the protection of Rome's legions, the elimination of her brother as a political threat, and the legitimacy of the world's greatest superpower standing behind the Egyptian throne. In Rome, the senators watched all of this with growing horror. They watched Caesar start wearing Egyptian-style robes at public ceremonies. They watched him talk about the concept of divine kingship, the Egyptian idea that a ruler is a god among mortals. They watched him commission a golden statue of Cleopatra to be placed inside Rome's most sacred temple, the Temple of Venus Genetrix. Cleopatra, inside a Roman temple. Then Caesar brought Cleopatra herself to Rome. He installed her in his personal villa across the Tiber, right outside the city walls, where he could visit her daily. Rome had never seen anything like it. A foreign queen on Roman soil, openly acknowledged as the lover of Rome's dictator, a woman who controlled the grain supply that fed the city's million citizens. The senators began to whisper something that they could barely allow themselves to say out loud. Caesar was planning to move the capital of the Roman Empire to Alexandria. Cleopatra had done the impossible. Without commanding a single Roman soldier, without firing a single arrow, without spending a single coin of Roman money, she had conquered Rome's greatest general from the inside. And then on March the 15th, 44 BC, the Ides of March, 23 men with daggers ended the dream. 23 knife wounds in the Senate chamber in the city that Cleopatra had nearly made her own. She was in Rome when it happened. She received the news in Caesar's villa, surrounded by his servants and his guards, in a city that now had no reason to protect her. Cleopatra fled Rome within days, took her son Caesarion, sailed back to Alexandria. And there, alone in the most magnificent city in the world, she waited. Because Cleopatra never made a move without a plan, and she still had one card left to play. His name was Mark Antony. 3 years after Caesar's assassination, the Roman world had split in two. On one side, Octavian, Julius Caesar's legal heir and adopted son, cold and calculating, consolidating power in Rome and the West. On the other, Mark Antony, Caesar's greatest general, brilliant but impulsive, controlling the eastern Mediterranean from Athens. Antony summoned Cleopatra to Tarsus to account for Egypt's behavior during the Civil War. He wanted answers. He wanted compliance. He wanted to establish beyond any doubt that he was the dominant power. Cleopatra made him wait for 3 months before she responded. And when she finally decided to show up, she didn't come alone. The ancient historian Plutarch wrote that the entire city of Tarsus came to watch, that the marketplace was deserted, the courts empty, the streets abandoned.
Every person in the city walked to the riverbank to see what was coming. What they saw was a golden barge with purple sails and silver oars gliding through the water, trailing clouds of perfumed smoke, with music playing on its decks, and on it, dressed as the goddess Venus, the most powerful woman in the world, waiting for Rome's most powerful general to come to her. Mark Antony, the man who was there to question her loyalty, ended up inviting himself to dinner on her barge. This was not an accident. For 10 years, Cleopatra and Antony ruled the Eastern Mediterranean together. They had 3 children. They called their combined holdings the Donations of Alexandria, a new empire that would stretch, they planned, from Britain to India, merging the Greek East with the Roman world under their joint rule. But in Rome, Octavian was watching, building, planning. He ran a propaganda campaign against them that was masterful in its cruelty. He claimed Antony had been bewitched by an Eastern sorceress, that Cleopatra had stolen Roman legions for her own use, that Antony had given away Roman territory as gifts to her children. He read Antony's personal will, illegally obtained from the Vestal virgins, aloud in the Senate chamber, claiming it proved Antony planned to be buried in Alexandria instead of Rome. It worked. Rome declared war on Cleopatra. The final battle came at Actium on the 2nd of September, 31 BC, a massive naval engagement off the Greek coast. Here's what history says. Cleopatra fled. She turned her ships and sailed away in the middle of the battle. They lost everything. But here's what history doesn't say. Someone had told Octavian exactly which ships to target. Someone had passed along the full details of Antony's battle plan. Cleopatra didn't flee because she was frightened. She fled because she knew in that moment that they had been betrayed from within. And a live Cleopatra in Alexandria was worth more to the future than a dead Cleopatra at Actium. She was right. She just didn't know how little time she had left. The story you know says Cleopatra VII, last pharaoh of Egypt, died on August 12, 30 BC, from the bite of an asp, a sacred Egyptian cobra, rather than submit to the humiliation of being paraded through Rome as Octavian's prisoner. It's a beautiful story, romantic, tragic, defiant, and historians are increasingly certain it isn't true. Consider the evidence. Asp venom doesn't kill quickly or quietly. It causes 4 to 6 hours of visible, agonizing convulsions, hardly the peaceful, composed death the Romans described. No snake was ever found in her tomb, despite an exhaustive Roman search. Roman guards watched her every moment. How did a snake get in? And the 2 servants who reportedly died with her? Asp venom doesn't kill that fast, or that cleanly, or that conveniently. Recent scholarship, including work by University of Dusseldorf toxicologist Christoph Schaefer, suggests a far more likely scenario, a fast-acting combination of hemlock, wolfsbane, and opium, something that would produce exactly the composed, quiet death the Romans described, something that could have been provided or administered by someone on the inside. Think about Octavian's position. A live Cleopatra was an existential threat. She could escape. She could inspire rebellions. She had her son, Caesarion, Julius Caesar's biological child, who was a more legitimate heir to Rome than Octavian himself. But a dead Cleopatra who chose suicide rather than face Rome, that was propaganda gold. That made Octavian look merciful. That made the story clean. Octavian executed Caesarion 12 days after Cleopatra's death. He became Augustus, the first Roman emperor, and he spent the rest of his 50-year reign systematically rewriting every history, burning every record, destroying every account that might reveal how close a single woman came to changing the entire course of Western civilization. Here is what history never told you. Cleopatra wasn't the last pharaoh of Egypt. She was the last person in the ancient world who could have united East and West, who could have built a civilization where Greek philosophy, Egyptian wisdom, Roman organization, and Eastern knowledge worked together as one. She spoke to Egyptian farmers in their own tongue, debated with the greatest Greek philosophers, negotiated with Roman senators in flawless Latin. She was what the ancient world could have become. That world was too dangerous for Rome to allow, so they killed her, buried her story, and spent 2,000 years convincing us she was nothing more than a beautiful seductress. The real Cleopatra was something far more threatening than beautiful. She was brilliant, and that is exactly why they had to destroy her. If this story opened your eyes, you're going to love what's coming next, because Cleopatra isn't the only powerful woman history tried to erase. Hit subscribe, ring the bell, drop the name of a historical figure you think whose real story has been buried in the comments below. I read every single one. This is NasahTales, the stories they never wanted you to know.